Hello and welcome to my channel, The Rambling Millennial. For today we're going to be discussing a book that I decided to start reading. It's right here. Hopefully you can read it. Hopefully the camera's turned in the right position. The title of the book is Balcony of Fog, written by Rich Shapiro. Now, before we start discussing this book, I did want to mention some unimportant information, but I still wanted to relay it to you regardless. Now, under normal circumstances, I probably would never consider this book, pick it up, or read it. But I did receive it in the mail for free. Thankfully, it was free. I never remember explicitly putting in an order for it, but it still came in the mail regardless. I did check my bank account because if it was money spent, it was money I did not have at the time, and thankfully that was not the case. And so I just tossed it in my to-read pile, and I finally decided to pick it up and start reading it. And therefore, I wanted to share my viewpoints regarding this work of fiction written by Rich Shapiro. Now, of course, I just wanted to put a slight disclaimer at the beginning of this video. This particular video is supposed to be a start of a series regarding this book, where I discuss themes on chapter-to-chapter basis, giving a brief review of what's going to be found in that chapter, and then my personal opinions about how I feel the writer did regarding that chapter. Now, I in no way endorse this book for anyone to read. It's possible that the series of videos I do have planned for this book could be canceled at any moment due to conscientious objections to themes and or events that are found within this work of fiction that don't line up with my personal beliefs. I state this due to the early flags that I've seen in chapter 1, but I am willing to give a book a chance. I'll probably give it a chance up to chapter 5 as far as deviations regarding morality. After that, it's possible that it could end up in the garbage bin. Now, we're just going to go ahead and we'll start discussing things or scenes that will be found in the book and characters before we get into how I feel about chapter 1. Now, the reader is immediately immersed into the writer's world building, using a set of scenes to paint the area surrounding the protagonist, Arden. Now, I want to describe how I see things, especially when I see books. Like most people, when you're reading a book, it's basically a movie in your head, and the same for me as well. My description for this particular movie in my head, it would paint the sky, the air, the people in sort of a grim, gray, lackluster coloring. It's not exactly grayscale, but it's not a lot of color to it. You get a sort of dystopian vibe as if you are in an era of the 1920s and 1930s, but you're really in the year 2000, whatever, or it could be 21,000. It doesn't really matter. I ain't got that far yet. And this is just how I see the opening pages of this book. It could be different for someone else, but for me, that's sort of the film effect in my head that I see while I'm reading. Now, we're going to go ahead and we'll go to more concrete images and events. You'll find that you're thrust into a scene of men doing toiling work. The men working are called toilers. It's not a particularly inventive word to call them for someone in a somewhat fantasy world, but regardless, it's simple, it's descriptive, and it gets the job done. The toilers, as they're called, are working as quickly as they can against a rushing torrent and Mother Nature bearing its tears from above. And if you don't get my description, that's raining. We're introduced to three characters in the opening scene. Arden, who is a toiler who seems to stand out from the rest, displaying traits of individuality. Then we have Jiggers, the foreman, who seems to be a guy who enjoys lording it over others. And last we have Neely, a man who does what he is told and nothing more. Now, of course, when reading a book, part of the journey is understanding the perspective and the imagery that runs amok in the mind of the writer. Now, I'm going to be honest here because, let's be honest, we don't all know everything. And so, same with me, I did not understand what a sluice was, so I had to do my research. Of course, based on context, thankfully, if you're a decent reader, you can use context to build what things are or mean. I was able to figure out that it was a sort of ditch in my head, not the actual definition of a sluice, and it was to deal with the runoff. But when I did my research, since I'm apparently not that educated, by doing the research, I was able to understand what a sluice was, and I was able to grasp what kind of work and difficulty the toilers had to experience. Now, delving a bit into personalities, we're going to start with Jiggers. He immediately comes off as a completely unlikable person, giving the reader someone to root against. Then Neely, he is a person to pity, whom one might hope is saved from his life of quiet acceptance. And then Arden, he's of course meant to capture your attention with his thoughts and actions, revealing a man capable of seeing the injustice around him and the willpower to do something about it. Now, during this scene, while they're working, we're thrust into a situation that puts Neely in a bit of danger, and he has an injury included with this. And Arden is given his first moment to display his heroic traits. Arden does so in defiance to Jigger's orders to continue working, making the foreman more unlikable as a character to the reader. Arden accomplishes his goal of saving Neely and is thusly rewarded with a punishment. As the saying goes, no good deed goes unpunished. Let me use English here. And with this event that unfolded, the reader begins to perceive the world as unfair, and that those who suffer are those who are at the bottom of the totem pole in regards to power and authority. And when Arden finally comes to, because if you continue reading, you find out he's knocked out, unconscious, and he comes to, he wakes up. He directs his attention to a cigarette. Again, here you may be required to do your research. I'm not going to tell you what it is. You do your own research if you haven't read the book or if you're interested in reading the book. And you're going to have to do this so that you can understand the writer's mental imagery. And when I did the research, it's a simple Google search. I felt shame because I already knew what a cigarette was, and I had to be reminded of it. So, yeah, I just felt shame for that, for no reason. No reason to be ashamed. The reader will find that there will be context to why a cigarette exists. Are priests and rain gods that are introduced to the mythology of the world. And it just feels like while you're reading, there should be more logical explanations to events concerning the material world around them. Now, Arden, once again showing his individuality, despises the beliefs, but because they're ingrained in him, he still fears them, the myths that surround these rain gods. Now, As I said, Arden was going to a location, and contained within this location is a boat that he subsequently named the Mariad. Hopefully, I'm pronouncing that correctly. No guarantees, but I'm just going to call it the Mariad in this case. This boat is a means of escape from his life as a toiler. The reader is given a brief description of the Mariad's particulars, the work that has been done to it or needs to be done to get it sailworthy. Moving forward in the story a bit, Arden senses something behind him, turns around, and sees that it's a bare woman. And I do have my gripes with this particular scene, but I'm going to let the writer have his own prerogative in the introduction of characters. I'm just going to let this one go in particular. Now, Arden is once again given the opportunity to show his heroic traits in nature by assisting the woman who, as described as the book, seemed desperate, mistrustful, and was shivering. Now, under the only light on his possession, and as you read the story, the book itself, you'll come to find out that lights are somewhat important. He's able to study her features in detail, allowing the reader to begin to form an image of this particular woman in their mind. During their brief conversation, we get a little bit more world building. I gotta stop saying bending. Building, giving a name to one of the supposed rain gods, his name being Ingus. Someone she clearly despises. But also revealed was her surprise that Arden and fellow constituents of his time period weren't thrown back in the Stone Age. Now this, of course, piqued my interest, and it might pique yours too. Finally, this mysterious woman introduces herself as Estra. Her backstory is muddled in pleasantries and random sentences. And what I mean by random sentences, maybe it will come off as normal to you or understandable, but for me, it was incoherent dialogue. You really couldn't make sense of it. At least I couldn't. I'm not going to say you. I couldn't make sense of it. It was incoherent dialogue to purposely shroud her in mystery, and that's my personal opinion. But we're going to get past that. They continue to converse, and then finally Arden is going to take her to his place of shelter. And the reason I keep using that is because this ziggurat can't really be considered a home. We all have different definitions of home, and my definition of a home does not match this place. So, place of shelter away from the rain. And the two have to sneak in because the ziggurat has rules. As they do, Astra establishes a dialogue between the two, allowing for a bit more world building as she discusses a bit about herself and Ingus, whom she is running from. Arden establishes a bit more, bringing more light about this particular individual, Ingus, and who he presents himself to be and what type of world the reader will find themselves in. As they converse more, they reveal more about themselves and strike a chord of somewhat kindred spirits. And much to my dismay, the reader is thrust into a spicy scene between the two. It's not terribly descriptive, but you know what happened. Soon after, Arden explains his plan of escape, and she wishes to go with him, cutting us off there, leaving the bait. So you will now read chapter 2. So I'm going to go ahead and start discussing my personal thoughts regarding chapter 1. I've got them written down here, and hopefully I can make sense of my own words. Now, Obviously, if you're going to get your book printed, hopefully, not obviously, hopefully, if you get your book printed, your characters are well defined and very descriptive. And I find that for this book, the characters' roles are established pretty clearly and it's done pretty well. Pretty well. I can't complain about it. The contextual world around the characters is described well too. Although I feel personally, and this is just me, that at times it was overemphasized. And I say that because I'm more of a dialogue reader. I love dialogue more than I love description. I don't need to know that the bricks were different tones of red, brown, and what's another color? Orange, and that they were glazed and that rain was dripping off of them. Well, not rain, dew was dripping off of them, and cracks were in bricks on the left side, and cracks were on the bricks on the northern side. I don't need to know all of that. I just need to know if it was a brick house or a brick building. But that's just me. Some people enjoy very descriptive books. I just need a little bit of description and then I can form the image in my head accordingly. I prefer dialogue, but in this case, it's not overly described, but it's just a little bit overemphasized for my taste. But there are exceptions to my rule about over description or overemphasize. Most books of the British period are going to be very descriptive, and I don't mind that because I love classic British books. So I get over it because that's just part of the time period. Now, I will say, as far as the first chapter goes, I wasn't completely enraptured in it. I felt like I was forcing myself to read it more so than I just absolutely enjoyed it and wanted to dive into it. And one of the bones I did want to pick was the ziggurat. In my opinion, and this is just my opinion, the writer could have just written a description of the building instead of putting that particular word in there. There are much better ways to get a description of the particular location. And I say this because I do not like, while I'm reading, having to do research while I'm reading. I don't want to stop and go. I just want to keep reading. When I did read over Sluice, I just went right over it. But a ziggurat, I needed to understand what in the world I was reading. And I'm not that type of person that does stop and go in a book. I just can't do it. I want to read it all the way through in a chapter. And I did not enjoy that. And that's just a personal gripe for me. It absolutely doesn't matter. That's just something I didn't like. Now, the other thing is Arden. For me, he as a character is contrived. Throughout the first chapter, you're given situations that try to make him a likable character. And of course, while you're writing, you're naturally going to do this regardless. But for me, in Arden's case, it didn't feel like it was a natural progression. It was simply event after event after event, and to establish his nature. And it did well in that regard. It established his nature, but in my opinion, it did build him as a character. I will say that giving him a little bit of a backstory, because there are some things in there that you will read if you decide to read the book, that reveal a little bit about Arden and a little bit about his backstory. But for me, I can't take Arden seriously as a character yet. At the moment, he just feels artificial, and that's just for right now. Hopefully, it'll change as I continue to read. Then there was the, as a YouTuber I like to watch says for certain words, spicy scene. Again, it's the writer's prerogative, and hopefully I won't be subjected to another in the next chapter, because if that happens, this book is going to find itself in the nearest garbage bin. Particular note about me regarding my media consumption, a big turnoff for me for any film, TV, screenplay, or book, or etc., because there's many other ways you can consume media, is a romance that's established immediately with no basis whatsoever. If the goal of your book or whatever media outlet you choose for your presentation, if your goal is to have two people romantically involved, I believe that the two should at least have had time to allow a relationship to mature to a point that is actually feasible. Of course, the application isn't, it doesn't apply in every situation or classification, but in this case, for Arden and Estra of this book, I believe that it was just absolutely too soon. That I believe there should have been time for the two to actually get to know each other. But regardless of my slight little gripes thus far regarding this book, especially the romance aspect at this time, that is the worst one, I'm actually rooting for it. I hope that what the writer has done can change my opinion as I continue to read. I would like this book to be more than something just to read, but something that I can actually enjoy and go back to later on. Hopefully the author's intentions doesn't deviate onto a path that will lead to this book's immediate dismissal from my personal library. Of course, when it comes to opinions, in my opinion, of course, an opinion is exactly that person's opinion. For other people who might have read or decide to read this book, it might be a perfect read. But we'll see in my case. I encourage you to leave comments below regarding this book if you've had an opportunity to read it already, or if you decide to read after me a little bit of chapter 1 to see for yourself. Leave a comment below. I want to know what you think about the first chapter. Now, keep in mind that if you've read the book all the way through and you decide to leave a comment, keep it on a chapter to chapter basis. If the video is chapter 1, leave your comment regarding chapter 1. If it's chapter 2, leave your comment regarding chapter 2. I would prefer not to have spoilers in the comments below so that my appetite isn't spoiled. And thank you for tuning in, and I hope that all of you have a good and safe day.